Indochina. Rise of anti-colonialism. Indochina had shown its discontent right from the beginning of the French occupation. While the Indo-Chinese resisted the imposition of French language and culture, they learned from them the ideas of revolution. During the First World War, about 1 lakh Indo-Chinese fought in France and returned with first-hand knowledge of how French had fought and suffered during the war. In 1916, there was a major anti-colonial revolt which was crushed brutally. There were also guerrilla activities in Tonkin, the place from where Ho Chi Minh was to arrive. The emergence of Viet Minh. The mainstream political party in Indochina was the Vietnam Nationalist Party. Formed in 1927, it was composed of wealthy and middle-class sections of the population. In 1929, the Vietnamese soldiers mutinied, and there was a failed attempt to assassinate the French Governor General. This was followed by the large-scale peasant revolt led by the communists. The revolt was crushed, followed by what is called White Terror. Thousands of rebels were killed. Ho Chi Minh was born in Tonkin. When Ho Chi Minh was 21, he went to Europe. After working as a cook in London hotel, he went to Paris. In the Paris Peace Conference, he lobbied for the independence for Vietnam. His article in newspapers and especially in pamphlet, French Colonialism on Trial, made him well known as the Vietnam nationalist. In 1921, he became a founder member of the French Communist Party. India in the days of Great Depression. The Great Depression of 1929 had a disastrous impact on British trade and business. Foreign investment declined, particularly in the heavy industry sector like railway building. For the colonial government, the expansion of trade was the only ideal mode of economy, as it guaranteed easy access to indirect tax revenue and foreign currency. British transmitted the effects of depression to its colonies. Bilateral trade treaties between Britain and the member states of the British Empire were signed at an economic summit in Ottawa in 1932, in which the participants agreed to give preference to imperial over non-imperial goods. Impact of depression on Indian agriculture. The Great Depression also dealt a death blow to Indian agriculture and the indigenous manufacturing sector. The value of farm produce declined by half, while the land rent to be paid by the peasant remained unchanged. In terms of prices of agricultural commodities, the obligation of the farmers to the state doubled. Farmers and the Indian manufacturers therefore had to sell their gold and silver reserves to subsist. The great fall in the prices prompted Indian nationalists to demand protection for the internal economy. The 1930s saw the emergence of the Indian National Congress as a militant mass movement. The call given by the Congress for a civil disobedience movement evoked tremendous response in rural India. Left radicalism was also very much in evidence. Anti-colonial movements in Africa. Colonization of Africa. The African coastline had been explored in the 16th century and a few European settlements had come about, but the interior of Africa was unknown to the outside world until the last quarter of the 19th century. European colonization began after about 1875. Boer Wars. The relations between the two British colonies of Natal and Cape Colony, and the two independent Boer states of the Transvaal and the Orange Free State had long been unfriendly. The discovery of gold in Transvaal in 1886 led to large numbers of British miners settling in and around Johannesburg. The Boers hated these people, whom they referred to as Uitlanders. The Boers taxed them heavily apart from denying political rights. Racist policy. The Afrikaners persuaded a harsher racist policy towards the blacks and the minority Indians. In 1923, an act was passed to confine the native residents to certain parts of towns. Already, an act of 1913 had segregated blacks and white farmers, which made it impossible for the blacks to acquire land in most parts of the country. Apartheid in South Africa became the racial policy of the Nationalist Party in 1947. From 1950 onwards, a series of laws came to be enforced. The whole country was divided into separate areas for the different races. Marriage between white and non-white was forbidden. Apartheid is based on the belief that the political equality of white and black in South Africa would mean black rule. Verwoerd, who was Prime Minister of South Africa from 1958 to 1966, was the brain behind the apartheid policy. The African National Congress, founded in 1912, fought the practice of racism. Repression was let loose against the leaders of the Congress. The ANC was banned and its leader Nelson Mandela was put behind the bars. Mounting pressure at the global level helped to end the racist regime in South Africa. In 1990, the ban on ANC was lifted and Mandela freed after 27 years. Political developments in South America. Mayas and Aztecs. Before the European discovery of America, three centers of civilizations existed there in Mexico, in Central America, and in Peru in South America. The Maya, the Inca, and the Aztec civilizations were highly advanced. There were several states in each of these areas of civilization. Well organized and strong governments existed. Around the 11th century, large cities formed into a League of Mayapan. For over 100 years, the League of Mayapan lasted. Aztecs from Mexico conquered the Maya country in the 14th century and founded their capital city of Tenochtitlan. For nearly 200 years, the Aztecs ruled their empire. The Monroe Doctrine. The fight for independence intensified when Napoleon fell in 1815. Some of the European kings wanted to help the King of Spain to crush the revolutionaries in the South American colonies. But Monroe, the President of USA, came up with his famous Monroe Doctrine, which declared that if Europeans invaded anywhere in America, north or south, it would amount to waging a war against the United States. This threat frightened the European powers. By 1830, the whole of South America was free from European domination. Thus, the US protected the South American republics from Europe, but there was no one to protect them from the protector, the United States. US imperial interests. At the dawn of the 20th century, the United States had occupied Cuba and Puerto Rico. After defeating the Spanish in 1898, from 1898 to 1902, Cuba was under US military rule. When the Americans finally left, they retained a naval station in Cuba. The US also retained its right to intervene in Cuban internal affairs. President Theodore Roosevelt's attitude to Latin American countries was summed up in the words, "Speak softly and carry a big stick." The Monroe Doctrine had banned European interference in the affairs of American continent. Roosevelt made an important amendment to the doctrine in 1904. It authorized US intervention in Latin America in order to maintain order. After effecting this amendment, the US became the dominant influence not only politically but also in economics. Great Depression in South America. The situation created by the Great Depression made it impossible for oligarchic regimes to accommodate the rising expectations of several assertive groups. In Mexico, there was violent social protest involving dissatisfied segments of oligarchic middle class intellectuals and peasant communities. Latin America protested American intervention and disliked their dollar imperialism. The opposition to political intervention produced a change in US policy after 1933. Franklin Roosevelt, in his Good Neighbor policy, agreed that the US would not intervene in the internal affairs of any state and would give economic and technical assistance to Latin America. What is dollar imperialism? The term used to describe the policy of the USA in maintaining and dominating over distant lands through economic aid is called dollar imperialism.